Hi, welcome to the Libertarian Alternative. My name is Mark Selzer, and today's guest is James Bovard. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me on, Mark.
So, you have written many books?
Yeah.
What are some of the titles? How many books have you written altogether?
8 books.
8 books, and what are some of the most well-known titles?
Well, the most well-known one is Lost Rights, The Destruction of American Liberty, that came out in 1994. Had a book come out in 2003 called Terrorism and Tyranny. Had a book come out last year called Bush Betrayal. Had a book 5 years ago attacking Clinton called Feeling Your Pain, The Explosion and Abuse of Government Power in the Clinton Gore years. So I've tried to make enemies across the board.
So you've been published, you've also written for newspapers, no?
Yeah, I've done a lot for newspapers and magazines.
LA Times, New York Times?
Yeah, I've written for those places. I used to do a lot for the Wall Street Journal. I've done a lot for Playboy in the past. Written for Reader's Digest and one piece for Newsweek and a lot of other places. So
pretty much everywhere. What about, are you currently at a university? Are you teach at a university?
No. Not likely.
Not likely?
No.
Okay. Well, now the last book was about the Bush Betrayal.
Correct.
Now, what is that about?
Well, it tries to explain to people how Bush has betrayed the Constitution and the ideas he talked about when he first ran. Because Bush did not run in 2000 promising to double the rate of growth of the federal government or to vastly increase federal power. But that's what he's done. And Bush has become so profoundly dishonest, and unfortunately so many conservatives have simply goose-stepped behind him.
Right. So what about, and the war specifically has been a huge increase in expenditure. What about that? Do you talk about the war in this book? Yeah,
I've got a chapter in there on the Iron Fist of Freedom, which is Bush's vision for Iraq. And it doesn't matter how many people we have to kill, we're going to make those son of a guns free. And it's fascinating to see some of the lies that have permeated the administration effort from the very start.
For instance?
Well, there were a lot of people who said that Bush was only misinformed prior to invading Iraq, but that wasn't the case. For instance, in Bush's notice to Congress on, I think, March 18th, 2003, Bush justified invading Iraq by trying to link Saddam to 9/11, even though the CIA had told him there was no such link. It was a total dishonest scam by on Bush's part, and yet that's how he sold the war.
So what about in Iraq? I mean, we're there now, and what's going on there, in your opinion?
A lot of Americans are dying. A lot of them are getting maimed. We are not winning hearts and minds. And we certainly are not showing them the high road to democracy. I mean, there are a lot of good soldiers there, good American soldiers, who are trying their best, but the structure isn't going to work.
Sure. I mean, my heart really goes out to those guys. I mean, they're there doing what their country has asked them to do. And it's sad for me to say that it's probably not the right thing.
Well, and there's a lot of good folks who are dying because of politicians' lies. And people that get so angry when you say that, it's kind of like, hey, it wasn't me that lied the country into war. I didn't make any false promises before the U.S. invaded. I haven't been doing bait and switch on weapons of mass destruction. But Bush is so contemptuous of any kind of responsibility for the lies he's told. He was asked by a Washington Post reporter shortly after his re-election, he was asked, well, what's going to happen because of these false statements on Iraq and these policy failures and the U.S. mistakes here? Bush said that the American people had their, quote, moment of accountability, unquote, and that's it, and the issue is closed. So Bush thinks of his re-election as whitewashing all of his lies and all of his frauds on Iraq.
So what about, there just doesn't seem to be a voice coming out of the conservative movement objecting to any of this. I mean, is anyone really speaking out with that has any respect or clout within the conservative or neoconservative organizations?
Neoconservative, yeah. The neoconservatives are going to be real upset by this. Yeah, it's really breaking their hearts. The U.S. went to war there. There's some conservatives that have said some good things. Pat Buchanan's occasionally said some great things on the war. His magazine's done some very good stuff on it, American Conservative magazine. Otherwise, if you talk to conservatives in private, a lot of them are very worried, a lot of them are unhappy, but mostly in public they're just kind of going with the, staying with the, staying with the president.
Right. It seems the legitimate right wing, or what I would call the legitimate right wing, seems to be against the war, but they seem to be a very small group of people that really aren't making much noise. They're kind of getting along to go along.
Yeah, I don't know what the standard for the right, for the part of it that would be considered legitimate or illegitimate. I don't know. It's ugly. It's ugly. I mean, and these are a lot of folks that seem to be very concerned about freedom when Bill Clinton was president, and very concerned about limiting federal power. But but Bush becomes president, and all of a sudden the president's power is sacrosanct.
Right. It's kind of like smaller government, but smaller Democratic Party government, but more of our kind of government. Less of your kind of government, but more of my kind of government.
Well, and it's it seems very comfortable with strong arm tactics, strong arm methods. And they don't want to let the Constitution stand in the way of Bush's triumph in the world, and that's not what the founding fathers had in mind.
And it's not much. It doesn't seem to be much of a triumph either.
No, it's ugly. It's ugly.
So what about you talk also in this book recently, or your most recent book, about torture at all? And the allegations of torture?
I've got a section in there that George Bush that the founding fathers did not envision the president being the torturer in chief. The torture scandal was starting to break at the time that this book, as I was finishing up the book, and the memos that were coming out at that point about these Justice Department lawyers arguing that the president was basically above the law, that the president could make a ruling and the War Crimes Act would not apply. I mean, these folks must have a much more advanced version of the Constitution than I have, because it's simply astounding. A lot of the statements that came out of the Justice Department, the Pentagon, the White House Office of Counsel.
Like some what? Give an example of these statements.
Where? Yeah, there was a Justice Department Office of Legal Counsel had a memo, I think, authored by John Yoo in August 2002, in which he specified the powers the president would have in this national emergency, basically, and basically that there were almost no limits on that almost all the limits on the president's power had been nullified simply because of the terrorist attack, and 9/11 had changed everything. It was almost like much, if not most, of the Constitution was thrown overboard, and that the president was far more supreme now than he had been before then. And it was such a parody of the entire vision of the founding fathers. I mean, people forget that the U.S. Constitution was not written by a bunch of college professors whose idea of combat was a bad meeting on the tenure committee.
Right.
It was written by people who had survived a horrendous war and horrendous post-war period, and they understood that there are terrible times sometimes, and that's what it's built for. But there were so many sunshine friends of the Constitution that we've seen the last few years. They're kind of saying, well, 9/11, who cares? So,
and since then we've learned even more about what happened, what's happened at Guantanamo. Some of it's just coming out, and also at Abu Ghraib, and that I don't think I'm pronouncing it correctly there,
Ghraib,
but
maybe.
Abu Ghraib. But since then we've
it's the
got
same
more.
way Bush says it. It's fine.
So we've had more information come out, and it seems more and more ugly each time, and the press seems to talk about it less and less.
Well, there's been some press coverage. The American Civil Liberties Union has done a great lawsuit against the feds, forcing them to divulge a lot of the memos. But I still think we may not have even seen the tip of the iceberg. I'm
afraid that's all we're seeing, and some people have died during these interrogations as well.
Well, but it was all natural causes, like being beaten over the head. I mean,